Hello, my name is Kat and I am a peer mentor for Info 203, and this is my instructional video on how to create and use a spreadsheet in Google Sheets specifically. So I'm not going to have time during this instructional screencast to go into a lot of depth on like every single thing you can do in spreadsheet because there are so many functions you can do with a spreadsheet. But what I want to show you is just a couple of tips on how to use a spreadsheet, and also just to show you that using a spreadsheet has many different functions and that it's pretty accessible for different types of data. So I consider myself a spreadsheet enthusiast. So the first thing I wanted to do before going into how to use a spreadsheet is just give you an overview of some of the spreadsheets that I personally used and created. So I won't go into too much detail for each of them, but here's an example of like a class plan spreadsheet that I've created and used to mark the classes I was thinking of taking and the competencies that they fulfilled. I also have an ePortfolio evidence organizer that looks very similar, but it marks pieces of evidence or classwork and competencies that they can also be used toward. I actually just finished ePort this semester, so I actually ended up using a different spreadsheet, this one that I made, to keep all of my evidence for each competency in a vertical format instead, and then I could pick three from all of the ones that I compiled here. I also had a readings column you can see in column D here, but I didn't end up using it. Another example spreadsheet I have here is this is sample Jeopardy questions I created for a game of Jeopardy that was based on like horror book and movie adaptations. So you can see these are like my example questions and the categories. And then this is an example assignment calendar spreadsheet that I used to keep track of all of my assignments for the different classes I was taking during a semester. So this is for summer 2025. I can mark the assignments that I finished using the checkboxes here. And then here's an example of a finance tracking spreadsheet. I removed most of my personal information from this, but this kind of gives you an idea of how you can set up a financial tracking spreadsheet. And then a last example spreadsheet here is a relationship tracker spreadsheet. And you might wonder, why do I need a spreadsheet for tracking relationships? Well, you know, sometimes as an adult, it's hard to keep track of which relationships you've paid attention to, or you might want to take down notes about important things about your friends or loved ones that will help you when you're like shopping for a gift for them, or when was the last time I even spoke to this person? So I've personally found that helpful in my personal life. All right, so now that we've taken a look at some of my example spreadsheets, you can see there's lots of possibilities of how you can set up and use a spreadsheet. I'm just going to go over some basic tips on what things you can do with a spreadsheet. So the first thing you want to do when you're creating a spreadsheet is think about what is the purpose of my spreadsheet. That will help you determine how you can format it and what you want it to look like. I always recommend using lots of colors, not only because it's visually appealing. You can see, right, that all my spreadsheets are very colorful, but it also just helps you visually distinguish different elements of the spreadsheet by having colors. So, you know, just looking at this wall of white is not very appealing or helpful. So you can see the default setting for a new spreadsheet is that you have this infinite field of columns and rows. If you don't like that, like me, I actually don't like this. One thing you can do is when you first start with a new spreadsheet, you can delete some of the rows and columns that you only have the number that you want and need. So the first thing I would do here is if I want to do that, I usually start with the columns. I find this easier to do. So what I will do is click on the columns that I don't want and then drag. So let's say I only want 4 columns. I'm going to hold my mouse down on E and then drag to the right. So I've highlighted E through Z here. Once I have them all highlighted, I can let go of my mouse and then I'm going to right click and then select delete columns E through Z. So now you can see I only have 4 columns. This looks a lot better to me because I don't need an infinite amount of columns and I prefer this. If I also want to limit the number of rows, I can do that as well. There's two ways I can do this. I can either select Control A on my keyboard like this, or I can click on this little box in the top left corner here. I don't know if this box has a name, but if you click on it, it highlights all the cells. So then if I want to only keep a certain amount of rows, what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key on my keyboard, highlight the cells that I want to keep. Let's say I only want to keep up to row 25. So I will highlight those, and then I will let go of the Control key, and I will right click on the cells that are still highlighted here, and then select delete rows 26 to 1000. So you see that gets rid of hundreds and hundreds of rows. So now I only have 1 through 25, and it looks much neater. I like this. And then again, if I change my mind and I'm like, no, I need more rows now, I can also add some back just using this button down here. So I can change it to add 10 rows, and now you can see I have 35 here. I do want to point out that you need to highlight all of the cells in all of the columns in order for this to work. So you can see here, I had to click and drag all the way to column D, right? And then it will give me the option to delete rows. If I did that, but I only selected like these two columns, right? So it's showing these cells are highlighted in these columns, and then these rows are still down here. If I try to right click like this, see, it won't give me that option. So you need to highlight all the cells in all the columns in order to delete some different rows. Okay, and then with that being said, maybe I also want to resize my columns. So if I want to resize them, I can click on the column up here, right click, and I can click resize right here. So I can change the number. Let's say I want this to be smaller, so I'll change it to 50 pixels. And now you can see it's smaller. I can also do it manually just by clicking and dragging up here. So you can see that little drag icon, so I can click and drag it like that. I can also change the size of multiple rows at once by clicking and dragging as well up here. And then if I click resize, I can resize all of them at once. So let's say I want them all to be 200 now. So you see they're all uniform. So those are some tips for formatting. And then maybe I also want to format the text that I have in my boxes, in my cells. So I won't go through every single feature. You can see a lot of the text formatting features up here, right? But some of the most important ones in a spreadsheet will be if you want to merge cells or if you want to wrap the text in a cell. So I will show you what that looks like. So if I wrote something here, days of the week, and I actually bolded this cell using Control B, so you don't have to make it bold. But if you're doing a header row of text, you might want to bold it. And then let's say I want this to be in multiple rows, right? So I can highlight the rows, and then I will click on this button here, and it lets me merge the cells. So you can see the text is aligned to the bottom of the cell. If I don't like that, I can click on this, the align button, and I can change it. So now I can make it center aligned, or I can make it top aligned. I personally prefer center aligned. I also want it to be centered in the middle of the cell, so I will change this from horizontal to center as well. See, now it looks better, right? It's starting to get towards the look that I want it to look like. Another thing is text wrapping. So if text is not wrapped, so I'm just writing this example sentence, it will overflow into the next column. So you can see here, the text from column B here is overflowing into column C. Maybe I don't want it to do that. So what I can do is click on this cell and then click on this option here that says text wrapping, and I will change this so that it wraps. Now you can see it stays in this one cell and doesn't fall into this column. Now, if you don't want it to do that, you don't want it to overflow and you don't want it to wrap, you can actually cut it off as well by clipping it. So you can see it just stops here. You can still see what it says by looking at the text up here, but you can change the text wrapping option. So you can overflow, you can wrap it, or you can clip it. I personally like wrapping all of my text. So I almost never use any other feature, but you might find uses for other types of wrapping features. You can also change the orientation of the text. So this can be helpful if you're creating like a label column or row. So for example, let's say I'm going to write Monday here, and I don't want Monday to be horizontal. I want it to be vertical. So I can change the text rotation so that it's vertical. I can either do it like this or up. And now you can see, for example, I could use this like this, right? Monday, and then I could have Tuesday, and they could go along this way down this column. So those are some options. This video is already getting quite long, so I will share a couple final tips and then I will wrap it up. So if we look at some of my other spreadsheets that I already have, you can see that one of the other features, actually I'll use this one, is that you can insert checkboxes. So you can see checkboxes in column D here, right? Oops, I right-clicked on it. If you want to insert checkboxes, what you can do is go to Insert. So I'm going to delete this text so I can show you. If I want to insert a checkbox in just this cell here, I will go to Insert, and then I will click on Checkbox. Pretty easy. If I want to add checkboxes to that entire column, I can highlight the column by clicking on C, the header up here, and then I'll still click checkbox, and then now they all have checkboxes. And you can check them, toggle them on and off just by clicking on the box like that. You can also add notes to boxes. So for example, if I go back to Insert, I can enter a note here. So if I want to type something that's not inside the box but floating on it, I want a note floating outside of the actual cell, I can add one here. You can also change the size of the note, see? So I can make it skinnier, I can make it longer like this. And then if I click outside of the note, it saves automatically, and now you can see it by hovering over the cell like this. So that allows me to have text inside the actual box here, as well as text floating on top of it. So that could be useful for multiple reasons. Like you can see in one of my spreadsheets over here, I have notes floating out instead of inside the actual box. And I did that because sometimes if you add a lot of notes, the spreadsheet will get very warped, right? Especially because I like to wrap my text. So if I want to keep the column this exact same size, but I still want to add text to the box, and the box is not large enough to add text, I can just add a note that has the text floating outside of it when I hover over it. So those are some examples of annotations that you can add to your spreadsheet. And that's different from adding a comment because comments will usually show who made the comment like that, and you can also assign action items. What other tip do I want to share? Okay, so again, I'm not able to get into every single feature that you can do with the spreadsheet in this instructional screencast, unfortunately. But the last tip I want to share is that you can use spreadsheets to add sums as well. So let's say I'm using this spreadsheet to add or keep track of numbers, right? So if I have a number in this box here, like 5001, and then I have a different number in this box here, I can add them in another cell by entering an equal sign, and then I will type the column. So this is column D, and then I'm going to look for the exact cell number. So let's see, that was D5. So D5, I'll know it's the right one because it will highlight that cell. And then let's say I want to add these two cells together. So I'll do D5 plus B8. And you can see it also highlighted that one. Then I'll just click enter, and then it automatically adds them for me like that. I can also do the same thing with subtraction. So if I wanted to do D5 minus B8, it'll show me the difference like that. And then if you have multiple rows of numbers, you can also see data about them by highlighting both of these cells. And then you can see down here, there will be a little informational box that will sum them for you. And if you click on it, you can also see the average, the minimum, and the maximum, and a number of numbers. So if there were more than two numbers, it would say like there's 5 numbers here, there's 10 numbers here. So that can be really helpful if you have a large quantity of numbers. So if we go back to my financial spreadsheet, right? Like this one, I could highlight this row here and it'll show me a sum and average account. And that could be useful to think, oh, okay, like the minimum number of the lowest amount of money I spent this month was like $27 or $28, and the highest amount was almost $700, right? So there's different features that you can use to your advantage when you're using a spreadsheet like this. All right, so that is going to be it for all of my tips for using a spreadsheet in Google Sheets. I hope you learned a little bit. I know that there's tons of features in a spreadsheet, but hopefully this helps you see that spreadsheets are pretty accessible and there's lots of things that you can do with them, and that you feel excited to go out there and explore a spreadsheet. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.